Hello, good morning. We're going to be doing continuing to do our reading, African Americans in early Rockford. We left off on chapter 4, but in the midst of our last reading about Rockford's history, city employees came out and washed away chalk. So I'm gonna start the chapter over. Chapter 4 is titled The Civil War Years, 1861 through 1865. And previously, good morning, just some of the topics, some of the things that this book has covered is the different struggles of African Americans in Rockford, to where you could be a successful businessman, but you couldn't vote. You could own this business and make money, but you cannot testify against a white man. So it's these type of things to where you can be what is deemed successful. You can have these businesses, but still people weren't given the same rights as the white people. And I had never known this. I believe it was in 1852. It didn't matter if you was a slave or if you were free, or if you never were a slave. If you was of African descent, legally, you could not legally enter Illinois. I never knew that. So we're going to start this reading, continue this reading. Chapter 4. By 1861, Rockford had a short but intense military tradition. In 1857, a military company was formed called the Rockford City Greys, later simply the Rockford Greys. Members supplied their own uniforms, and the state of Illinois supplied weapons after the organization was accepted into the militia. The Greys held regular drills, participated in various civic celebration and observances, and both hosted and attended regional military encampments. They also formed a connection with Elmer Ellsworth. Ellsworth, then living in Chicago, had an avid interest in military matters. He translated the Zouvet drill book from the French, and in 1858 trained the Greys in the new French maneuvers. And the Greys became the first military unit in the United States to learn the Zouvet drill. In 1859 and 1860, Ellsworth became a national figure when he toured the North with the Chicago Company, exciting audiences with a drill first perfected by the Rockford Greys. After Ellsworth became the first Union officer killed in the war, May 24, 1861, former members of the Greys, still in Rockford, donned their old uniforms and marched to a memorial service at the Second Congressional Church, the last appearance of the unit. The Greys became inactive in 1859, beset with financial troubles and loss of key men. But during the 1860 presidential campaign, the military company form re-emerged with the organization of the Republican Wide Awakes, who led torch-lit campaign processions and acted as an escort to various visiting speakers. After Lincoln was elected, the leader of the Wide Awakes, a photographer named Garrett Nevis, organized a new military company called the Rockford Zouvets. They began their drilling in January 1861. Many former members of the Greys, as well as the Wide Awakes, joined the ranks of the Zouvets. Despite the pre-war activity of these groups and the often intense local interest, membership was restricted. Members were required to outfit themselves with the uniform and only young men from the more prominent and respectable families joined. There were rarely more than 40 members at any time. When war broke out and Lincoln called for troops, the Zouaves immediately offered their service to the state of Illinois. Certain problems had to be addressed. For one, the Zouaves numbered less than half the personnel needed for one standard company and an infantry regiment, 100 men. So membership, my fault. It's a mark on this page. Okay, so membership in the Zouaves was open to the general white public, and the ranks were more than filled immediately. Another problem was uniforms, which was solved by organizing a grand sewing bee at Concert Hall and the bank building in the 100 block of South Main Street. Here, scores of people, some with their own sewing machines, worked day and night for a week making uniforms for the Zouaves. Money was I wonder if that was, it don't say nothing about if that was voluntary or if that was forced or if they were paid, if there was wages. I wonder. Money was raised for transportation and food costs as well as outfits. On April 24th, 1861, the Zouaves left the city with great fanfare and soon became Company D, 11th Illinois Volunteer Infantry. This regiment was a 3-month unit. When the regiment's term expired on July 30th, it was immediately remustered as a 3-year outfit, and most of the men signed up for the longer term. They were all given furloughed time, however, and for some weeks were again in Rockford. James Williams, Dave's youngest brother, Dave was a successful barber. He owned a successful shop here. So James Williams, Dave's youngest brother, was caught up in the same military feeling as other young men. He tried to enlist, but was rejected because of his race. Despite this, he was determined to play a part in the conflict regardless of the white man's rules. When the Zouaves returned for the furloughs in early August, Garrett Nevis was promoted to major in the new 11th. Jim Williams approached Major Nevis, who hired him as his personal servant and groom, with the understanding the young man would also be the barber to the regiment. On September 2nd, 1861, he left the city to take up his duties with the regiment. Though a civilian rather than a soldier, Jim Williams proved his mettle. Besides faithfully performing his regular duties, he served as a messenger and ammunition carrier in battle, sometimes taking a musket to do soldiers' duty as well. His best-known experience in this period came at the Battle of Shiloh, April 6th and 7th, 1862, one of the bloodiest and hardest-fought engagements of the war. Shiloh was a Union victory snatched from near defeat. Carrying ammunition to the front, he encountered Nevis, who shouted at him, "Get out of here! Take my horse back!" Williams started to the rear with the horse and came upon Private James Bookout of Rockford, badly wounded. He carried Bookout to safety and found medical attention for him, saving his life. After the war, the two men were fast friends, until Bookout died in October 1903. The two Jims always spent April 6th together. Okay. After Bookout died, Williams, then living in Chicago, returned to Rockford on the anniversary of Shiloh to spend the day in the company of old comrades in the Rockford guard post. He also returned to the city on Memorial Day to march again with his comrades. Williams' duties involved occasional trips back to Rockford. At the time of his death in 1919, an acquaintance recalled, "There never was a squarer man than Jim Williams. The boys trusted him implicitly. On one trip back to Rockford, he brought relatives of the soldiers several $1,000s, every penny of which he accounted for." This phase of Williams' Civil War career ended in late March 1863, when he returned to the city and resumed work for Brother Dave. The reason he left was related to the unofficial, but soon-to-be official policy of the Confederate Army to execute or enslave any captured black officer or enlisted men. It is likely Nevis, now colonel of the 11th, sent him home for his own safety. Colonel Nevis was killed in May 1863 at the siege of Vicksburg. After the war, Rockford's guard post was named in his honor, and Jim Williams became an active member, based on his later service in the 47th U.S. Infantry. Much of Williams' life in the Civil War years is obscure. He married Mary Scott in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, on September 22, 1862. In 1863 and 1864, the federal government began actively trying to recruit black soldiers, and at some point, he went to Marengo and tried unsuccessfully to enlist there. Finally, on February 23, 1865, he enlisted in the 47th Regiment. The records give his residence at this time as Belvedere, so it is likely he and his bride lived there after their marriage. He served as a private in this unit until he was mustered out June 8, 1865, a genuine Union soldier at last. Although these months of service must have seemed rather subdued after his earlier experiences. He returned home not long after he was mustered out, probably to Belvedere, but was residing in Rockford again by the spring of 1866. When the war began, Reuben Armstrong was having business problems. He had been forced to leave his longtime location in the summer of 1861, when the old arcade building was razed. In March 1862, he had to move again, from the corner of East State Street and First Street to 413 East State Street. Where is that? Oh, that's... Okay, so that's 416. Okay. That's 412. 413. 413 right here? Interesting. Okay. So that's... Let me see. Never mind. We can do this later. It is interesting to know, to see some... one thing this book is really good at is putting the addresses of these things down. So it is good to see some of these addresses, and most of it, the vast majority of it, is in this area. So it is interesting to see that some of these places and addresses, knowing that they have historical ties, at least. Okay. So, where were we? Okay, that's where we are. While he struggled to find a permanent location, he managed a small personal triumph. His entry appearance in the floral exhibition of the Rockford Horticulture Society won a premium for Best of Show. As noted earlier, Armstrong had pronounced political feelings and was willing to back them up with words and money. Now he was prepared to act. But it was harder for him than Jim Williams to get involved, for he was not only black, but he was now 43 years old. Always resourceful, he found a way. In his own words, on September 28, 1862, I left to engage in the defense of our country's cause with the 74th Illinois Volunteers, and as a body servant to Colonel J. Marsh, remained with the regiment until they were mustered out of service on the 12th of June, 1865, and they returned to Rockford. He also served as barber to the regiment. An attorney, Jason Marsh, was one of the city's most colorful characters. His connection with Armstrong went back many years, for Marsh's office was in the Arcade Building when Reuben began business there in the summer of 1845. Marsh has been vividly described a bold, daring man, a fluent speaker, ready for any emergency, a man of fine presence, slightly pompous, very courteous, and extremely fond of society. He delighted in picturesque costumes. He was a lover of games, especially chess, and spent long afternoons and evenings at this pastime, much to the detriment of his business. Such a man would certainly find Reuben Armstrong a challenging opponent over cards. In the 1840s, Marsh had been a leader in the vigilantes who lynched the Driscolls. In the 1840s, Marsh had been a leader in the vigilantes who lynched the Driscolls and had taken an active role in the prosecution of the bandits connected with the Mulford robberies. He was active in local politics, first as a Democrat, then as a Whig, then as a Republican. He had served as clerk of the Circuit Court, alderman of the Second Ward, and city school inspector. In 1862, he raised the 74th Volunteer Infantry, became its colonel, and was made commandant at Camp Fuller, newly established as a camp of instruction for 4 infantry regiments. Armstrong's age was of no concern to Marsh, for he was 12 years older than the barber. Marsh and Armstrong were the most interesting pair of men to leave Rockford together for war. 2 incidents are known of Reuben Armstrong's experience in the nearly 3 years he was away at war. In November 1862, Major Edward F. Dutcher of the 74th wrote the editor of the Ogle County Reporter, Oregon, Illinois, and the letter was reprinted in the Rock River Democrat on December 2nd. Dutcher reported that the regiment on the march from Louisville to Nashville attracted many contraband or runaway slaves. Some stay, while others stay long enough to... I don't know what that word means. I think it means steal. Okay. Some stay while others stay long enough to steal a blanket or two and then step out. Colonel Marsh brought a barber along from Rockford. Reuben is his name. One day, Reuben coaxed a runaway slave to go along with the regiment. Okay, so now we get into racist language. This is something that somebody wrote and something that was in the newspaper at this time. So he that would be described as a racial slur. The runaway slave wanted to disguise himself, and so Reuben put on him Lieutenant Burgess' overcoat, a new one. The runaway slave went along about 2 miles and slid out and went home. At least a good overcoat better. Dave Dixon, editor of the Democrat, commented, "All of our readers will know who the runaway slave spoken of is. His philanthropy for his race cost him a coat." A grim incident took place at the end of December 1862. The 74th had its first major battle experience at Murfreesboro, Tennessee, Battle of Stones River, and performed very well in a ferocious engagement. On January 14th, 1863, the Democrat reported, "We heard a rumor upon our streets yesterday that Reuben Armstrong had been captured and shot by the rebels. We do not place any reliance in the report because we think Reuben is a little too cute." Okay, so again they use a slur to describe a man of African descent. We will take okay, so it say we think Reuben is a little too cute of they say the slur to be caught. He will take good care. Okay, this is real. He will take good care. Don't get a chance. Okay, he will take good care the rebels don't get a chance to put their threat into execution of shooting all the contrabands they catch within their lines. And then again, the contrabands that they are referring to are runaway people who are enslaved. They're describing these people, these individuals, as contraband. The Register of January 17th published a letter from Colonel Marsh detailing the 74th's recent battles and informed Rockford readers that Reuben Armstrong was taken prisoner on Tuesday, December 30th, but managed to escape and come back to us Friday, January 2nd. Armstrong was indeed in serious peril, and it would be interesting to have his own account of the experience. Colonel Marsh proved to be an able field officer, but was unable to serve the entire war. Seriously wounded at Missionary Ridge in November 1863, he resumed his command after 2 months' recovery in Rockford. But the 1864 campaign from Chattanooga to Atlanta proved too much for him. He resigned his commission in August 1864. Reuben Armstrong remained with the regiment until June 1865, as much a fixture to Rockford men on the battlefield as he had been in the city. When he came home, he had been gone 33 months and had sacrificed and risked as much for the Union as any man in Rockford. Dave Williams did not go off to war. Rather, he stayed home, expanded his business interests, and enhanced his place in the city. In the early war years, he refined and expanded his hair services to women, so that by the end of 1862, his salon was the largest and finest in the city. His services to the male population did not suffer, however. In May 1862, he announced that on Sundays, he and his staff would attend to men exclusively, probably because the day was the most convenient for men. In November 1862, he issued shaving tickets offering discounts. 6 shaves for 50 cents, 12 for $1. Although unlikely, this was the first use of such tickets. Although unlikely this was the first use of such tickets in the city, it was the first time that they had been promoted through advertising. The Williams enterprise was not confined to barbering. In late September 1863, Dave opened up an oyster saloon. Interesting. I don't know how I feel about oysters. I don't really. Oysters don't do it for me, I'll be honest. Adjacent to his shop, a sort of luxury fast food restaurant. This specialty restaurant was operating through February 1864 at least. Once again, his abilities were noted in the newspapers. Everybody knows that what Dave undertakes to do, he does with a vim and in the best style. We guess Dave has had some experiences before in the oyster business. He seems to understand it. This oyster saloon may be seen as the first evidence of the catering business, with Dave and Rebecca Williams operating for another 3 or 4 years. Another connection with specialty food was noted in June 1864 when he was awarded a premium by the Rockford Horticultural Society for a fine plant of Triumph de Gand. I don't know. Some type of strawberries. It was noted that he had, as usual, sent in some very fine strawberries, which suggests a continuing interest in the raising of the berry at least. By 1866, the Williams family was noted for catering large events. During the war, events, personalities, and energy expanded and secured the Williams family reputation. Jim Williams was a war hero and clearly associated with the martyr Colonel Nevis. Dave kept a high and innovative profile on the home front, where his geniality, energy, and accommodating nature made him popular. He had a noted sense of humor. E.C. Daughtry of the Register said, "Dave is so much of a joker, it is difficult to tell when he is earnest." James Fox, junior editor of the same paper, and one of Dave's cronies, remarked once, "By the way, Dave, we owe you one for that Thanksgiving joke you played on us." By the end of the war, David Williams was the most prominent African American in the city, whose high reputation was reflected in references to him scattered throughout the local newspapers. Rhetoric involving him often went beyond these prominent. My fault. Rhetoric involving him often went beyond the usual promotional puffery and newspaperesy of the time. The Republican called him the Grand Sultan. The Grand Sultan of all the barbers. I don't know what that means. And asserted that he stands at the head of his profession. To the register, he was the unapproachable barber. The Democrat referred to the Prince of Barbers and the renowned Dave. In 1861, Elijah Blaisdell of the Republican called him the proprietor of the finest barbershop the city has ever had. Dave's success brought another brother to the city, John Williams, who arrived in July 1862. John was also a barber. John, also a barber, immediately secured and fitted up a shop on East State Street, the first room west of Horn's store. Here his shop would be a reflection of Dave's shop on the west side, full service to men, and soon a separate, specialized ladies' department. At this time, John was about 30 years old, born in Pennsylvania. His family consisted of his wife, Elizabeth, and 3 children, Fanny, Carl, and an infant, Eva. At least 5 of their children were born to John and Elizabeth Williams in Rockford: Mary, Ella, Mabel, Harry, Jenny, and Jenny. It's just one Jenny. My fault. It's just one Jenny. In Rockford, the family lived on the south side of East State Street, near Charles Street. Though not much detail is known of John Williams' career in the city, it is certain that he did well. In the 1870 census, his real estate was valued at $2,000 and his personal property at $800. At this time, he was the 3rd wealthiest African American, behind cousin Reuben Armstrong and brother Dave, and just ahead of brother Jim. John Williams stepped into the spot Armstrong was vacating on the east side of Rockford. No record has survived which mentions Armstrong's thoughts on this turn of events. But after the war, John's presence on the east side will only complicate the troubled Armstrong-Williams relationship. Not all the new arrivals were kin to Reuben and Dave. In May 1862, Wiley Waldron, sometimes Walden, opened a men's barbershop on the west side, opposite Clark and Bucher's jewelry store, the location once used by Reuben Redmond. Waldron was born 1824 in North Carolina. With him were his wife, Julia, and at least one child, William. Waldron had operated a shop in Beloit, Wisconsin, for at least 2 years, and was reasonably well-to-do. At the time of the 1860 census, his real estate was valued at $2,000 and his personal property at $150. He employed at least one other barber at that time. William Harding, who lived in the Waldron household. He employed at least one other barber at that time, William Harding, who lived in the Waldron household. By 1866, Waldron was working in a barbershop operated by William Waring, either as a partner or an employee. Waring had also worked as a barber in Beloit in 1860. He was born in Virginia and had a wife named Sarah, and at that time had no children. Waring came from Beloit to Rockford sometime between 1862 and 1866. In the latter years, the shop Waring and Waldron operated was located on the south side of West State Street, 3 doors east of the southeastern corner of Church. Waring lived in the shop while Waldron had a residence on North Horseman Street between Mulberry and Peach, now Jefferson. For a few exciting weeks in 1864, Rockford was the home of H. Ford Douglass, a nationally known black radical activist, little known in the 20th century because of his early death in 1865. Douglass was born a slave in Virginia, 1831, but escaped and came north from Louisiana in the late 1840s. Let's see. Barely in his 20s, he made a reputation for himself in Cleveland, Ohio, then in Chicago. He took the name Douglass because of his admiration for Frederick Douglass. Indeed, the two men made speaking tours together, even though Ford Douglass was much younger and much more radical than his revered mentor. Ford Douglass felt the American Constitution to be a pro-slavery document, which needed to be replaced before a black man could ever become a citizen of the Republic. This was not likely to happen, he believed, so the country was a hopeless place for Africans. He worked at promoting immigration from the United States into first Canada, then to Haiti. In the late 1850s, he toured, making speeches attacking the federal government for his pro-slavery activity. It ought to be replaced. It ought to be replaced, he said, and he would have no compunction in taking up arms to fight it. He spoke against Abraham Lincoln in 1860 because Lincoln was committed to preserving the Union and would not speak out or act against slavery. When the Civil War began, Ford Douglass hailed the Southern secession because it ended the despicable union between freedom and slavery, and gave the free North a perfect opportunity to crush slavery in the South. Ford Douglass was known in Rockford. He and Frederick Douglass had been in the city in February 1859 as a featured speaker for a series of anti-slavery meetings. Despite severe cold, they addressed an audience of 400 and 500 on February 9th and 10th. The Daily News gave Ford Douglass a short notice. Mr. H.F. Douglass, well known in Chicago, was the first speaker. His theme was the essential wickedness of slavery, a subject he handled with much ability and eloquence. He closed his address amid great applause. As befitted his prominence, Frederick Douglass' remarks were reported at much greater length. As the conflagration of war expanded in 1861 and 1862, it soon appeared to most far-seeing observers that the North would win, and the most prominent casualty would be the system of slavery, despite the statements of moderate Northern politicians like Abraham Lincoln, that the real issue was the preservation of the Union, and the continued existence of slavery might be accepted to achieve this end. So again, that go to the point and go to show that Abraham Lincoln was never really fully mounted to end slavery. Abraham Lincoln, and there are quotes of these things where Abraham Lincoln talk about even if he do end slavery, even if he do abolish slavery, he's not trying to give the people who are free, he wasn't trying to give them the right to vote, he wasn't trying to give them the same rights that these white people had, that these slave owners had, that he never viewed people of African descent as equal. Never viewed them as equal. Openly admitted openly admitted these things. You can go and read these quotes where he talk about these things. That even if he do free them from slavery, he's not going to give them the same rights as people that are white. Okay. How much longer this chapter? Let me just see. Okay. It's got about 11 more pages. Okay. In the spring of 1862, Ford Douglass left Chicago and took a job as a barber in Belvidere. The Belvidere Standard noted his presence and remarked, "Douglass can make a good speech as well as handle barber tools in an artistic way." Toward the end of July, efforts began in Boone County to raise men for a 3-year regiment, which would later be designated the 95th Illinois Volunteer The 95th Illinois Volunteer Infantry. The citizens of Boone, nearly as ardent in their anti-slavery as those of neighboring Winnebago County, knew exactly who Ford Douglass was, and quickly pulled him into the recruiting frenzy. A public letter signed by 42 men was addressed to Ford Douglass on July 28th, requesting him to deliver an address on the emancipation of slaves at Fuller's Hall in Belvidere on the evening of August 2nd. Douglass accepted. "It will be my pleasure to see as many of the citizens of Belvidere as may feel an interest in the preservation of one of the best governments on earth." In the same issue was published a schedule of war meetings to be held in Boone and DeKalb counties, July 28th through August 8th. These meetings, part of the recruiting effort, would be addressed by a picked committee of 5 men, including Douglass. One of his associates was Wales W. Wood. Wales W. Wood, what a name. Wales W. Wood. Later of the 95th and the historian of the regiment. By the time these arrangements were made public, Douglass was deeply involved in the effort. He had enlisted as a private in Company G on July 26, and later that evening addressed a war meeting in Belvidere. The comments of Ralph Roberts, editor of the Standard, are interesting. Roberts, on July 29th, published a short note on Douglass. Of considerable note, as an anti-slavery lecturer who for some time past has been plying the tonsorial art in our village. Douglas has enlisted and gone for the war, enrolling his name in Bush and Humphrey's company. Since the muscles, okay. Let me see if I can. Since the muscles of black men will not be refused under the new policy, Mr. D tenders his service and goes into the field. He will speak at meetings in these different towns in the county, also at Fuller Hall, on Saturday night. These events reflect several remarkable developments. For one thing, they illustrate how far Douglas had moved in 2 years. In 1860, he was rejecting Abraham Lincoln and denouncing the federal government as an instrument of oppression based on a pro-slavery constitution. So this ain't like he sold out. I don't know if I can. Now he refers to the preservation of one of the best governments on earth and joins the ranks of the Union Army. Ralph Roberts, a man of strong anti-slavery opinions, believed incorrectly that black men would be allowed to serve in the army under the new policy. This was still some time in the future, and then only after special provisions had been worked out. Not only was Douglas, a famous black man, accepted into the ranks of the 95th, his services were avidly sought and used because his presence would increase white enlistments. Douglas's connection with the 95th has been known to historians who have said Douglas's connection with the 95th has been known to historians who have said he somehow enlisted or suggested that his light skin allowed him to pass as white. He was indeed one of only a few score African Americans to serve in the white regiments. But the events in Belvedere, July 1862, are more remarkable than the mere fact of enlistment. He was not just accepted, he was embraced warmly as a comrade. Winnebago and Boone counties were truly the heart of the anti-slavery movement in northern Illinois. It's one thing to be the heart of the anti-slavery movement, but are you the heart of the freedom movement? That's one thing that reading the book of Angela, I forget the exact title, but reading Angela White Davis, that made me realize that it's not enough to be anti-slavery. Abraham Lincoln was anti-slavery, but Abraham Lincoln wasn't for freedom. Abraham Lincoln wasn't for equality or equity. So what did that really mean to be just anti-slavery? And that's how you get issues. A lot of the issues that came from slavery is too many people. And this happened. This problem continues to this day, to where people are anti one thing, but then okay, what come next? Supposedly you anti-slavery, but okay, you abolish slavery, then what come next? What do you do to help the people that were enslaved for hundreds and hundreds of years? What do you do to help those people? And if you don't do anything, if you just try to, whether it's try to remove them from the country, or whether you try to make them work for low wages, minuscule wages. Are you really anti-slavery? So, the heart of the anti-slavery movement, that leads people to be more in line with Abraham Lincoln, to where you're not trying to give people of African descent the same rights. Not trying to give. Abraham. You can go and find these quotes that Abraham Lincoln gave. That even if he do abolish slavery, if he do get rid of slavery, he was never trying to give Africans the full rights that were listed in the Constitution. That's why what Fort Douglass say before he joined this war and before he I gotta stop reading this book. All right, I'm not gonna stop reading this book. I'm gonna stop reading it today. And this is why I agree with Fort Douglass before he do these actions. Let me see. Where you call it the a racist constitution. I went too far back. My fault. How do you go from having these opinions and believing in these things and speaking out against Lincoln? When he spoke out against Lincoln, because Lincoln was not committed to ending slavery or getting rid of slavery, abolishing slavery. Lincoln was concerned with saving the Union, preserving the Union. Lincoln come out and quotes that it don't matter if it was slavery and or not. He's trying to save the Union. He's trying to he only focus on the safety of the Union, because the safety of the Union, that give him strength, that give him power to have the Union intact. And again, my fault. Okay, I gotta stop reading this book right today. But again, when you don't tell the full history, when you tell one side of history, when you tell blatant lies or misleading information, that a consequence of those actions is the same issues, the same problems that took place, they occur again. History repeats itself. And that's what happens when you have a schooling system in place, when it's only white history that is taught. Is certain things in this book that I have never known before. Certain historical facts of the city I've lived in my entire life that I've never known before. And why is that okay? Why is that a normal thing? Why is that? Why aren't these things taught in schools? Why aren't these issues covered and talked about more openly? So we're gonna end it there. We're gonna pick back up. Try to pick back up tomorrow. We're gonna try to pick up tomorrow. It's a beautiful day. We'll be at Food Truck Tuesdays a little bit later. A little bit later on, I'm gonna get there around 5. So we're gonna continue that. African Americans in early Rockford.